Hello, and welcome to today's virtual happy hour tour. I am Brenda Holt with the Arizona State Office of AARP. We are the nation's largest nonprofit, nonpartisan organization dedicated to empowering people 50 and older to choose how they live as they age. With a nationwide presence, ARP strengthens communities and advocates for what matters most to families, to more than 100 million Americans 50 plus and their families, regarding health security, financial stability, and personal fulfillment. ARP also produces the nation's largest circulation publications, the AARP Magazine and the AARP Bulletin. During the months of November and December, ARP will focus to help you navigate the complicated healthcare system. Caregivers are frequently frustrated by their healthcare systems, from Medicare, insurance, and care coordination to inadequate healthcare staffing and medication management. We know helping your loved ones navigate their medical needs is hard. ARP is your wise friend, and we're here to provide support and guidance. We can also help assist with resources, expert content, and tools. Visit us at aarp.org/caregiving for more information. Thank you again, and I'll turn it over to Marshall.
Folks, welcome to the show. Get ready to meet your host for the night, Arizona's very own hip historian himself, Marshall Shore.
Well, hello and good evening. I want to welcome you all to Arizona History Happy Hour. I am so happy that you can be here this evening. Oh my gosh, we've got such an exciting show for you tonight. Oh, just you wait. So I want to welcome you all. I know you're watching in a variety of sources, or maybe you're catching this after the fact as a podcast on Spotify or iTunes. There's so many ways you can join us and have fun with Arizona history. So my name is Marshall Shore, and I am the host of Arizona History Happy Hour. And so today it is November 9th. And, so on this date back in 1931, it was the ending of the preliminary hearing for Winnie Ruth Judd that went on to become a sensational trial that we still are wondering what really happened, even though she was found guilty, put in the state mental hospital for almost 40 years. It's an ongoing story that, Phoenix Theater is actually getting ready to this season put a play on about it. There is a new book coming out, I think in the fall, about it. So, it's one of those perennial stories that just keeps Arizona, us looking back at ourselves again and again. So, all right. So it is also National Go to an Art Museum Day. Today, over 30,000 museums celebrated by doing a variety of programs, inviting students to come in and explore. Oh, and I see Ben is on here, who actually, indeed, yes, you might have something to say about that, Ben. So indeed, so happy to see you. And Bruce, happy you're here as well. And so, if you didn't get a chance to go to a museum, you can still look at things online. So many museums are now doing virtual, or you can always maybe research an artist or something that you've been wanting to know more about. Now, it is also the Chaos Never Dies Day. For so many of us, it's like, that chaos is hard to avoid. And today is a day, just make peace with it, because it's going to be there. I've got friends who basically say my life is kind of organized chaos. So, which I kind of prefer as opposed to stayed and steady. But it is also National Scrapple Day. Oh my gosh. People have been enjoying this for hundreds of years here in the U.S. It is pork, buckwheat flour, cornmeal, and spices. My memories of this are seeing it on little diners in New Orleans. After a late night, you might want to have some scrapple, or maybe not. So it is also World Freedom Day because this commemorates the day of the fall of the Berlin Wall, as well as Geriatric Tooth Fairy Day. You know, it's a day that's intended to bring awareness to geriatric and their dental care. Oh, Strapple's a Cincinnati thing. Oh. So, you know, there's all kinds of fun things. All right. So what can you expect from tonight? Well, you know, we've got a little bit of trivia coming up. We've got some music history, which I think is just fascinating. Little Arizona connecting talking about a little town, as well as a beverage. And of course, you know, there is an amazing special guest that I'm so happy to honor tonight, but we'll talk about that in just a moment. So my name is Marshall Shore, but I'm also known as the Hip Historian, which means I get to play with Arizona history. I just picked up a batch of t-shirts. We have Mr. Lucky's Bikini Lounge and a couple others because, you know, just around the corner are some holiday markets getting ready to start. I mean, kind of the grand day of them all is Festivus coming up mid-December. That's a lot of fun. So I will have shirts as well as some other things. And just this week, that old museum near the airport, Pueblo Grande, was renamed Suda Akiv Museum. We'll talk about that more at the end of the show. And just before we went on air, you know, the Mellon Textile Building, which is at 7th Avenue and Grand pretty much, or 333 North 7th Avenue, originally was built in 1924. There was a fire. It was then mostly rebuilt in 1935. We just got notice about 20 minutes ago that a permit for demolition has been pulled. So it will be interesting to see what happens. Hopefully the city can make some arrangements to keep some of that building around. All right. And if you haven't made your way to Scottsdale, oh my gosh, one of my favorite events of the year is going on right now, Canal Convergence. There are 10 artists that have some really cool things. So it is going on until the end, well, until I think 10 o'clock on November 12th. So you've still got plenty of time to get out there. There's music, engaging art, so much fun to go see. Now, I see many of you have found the chat, so thank you so much for chiming in, as well as if, say, you know, maybe you want to throw out some ideas. You know, you can reach out to me on Facebook, Instagram, email, or even my website, because I love to hear from you all. And also coming up in January, the Orpheum Theater is celebrating 95 years of opening its doors for vaudeville and film. And I'm thrilled to say that we have been asked to present Arizona Unzipped, an educational burlesque show on stage. January 5th and 6th, that Friday and Saturday. Tickets are on sale now. And so here's where it becomes happy hour, because there is indeed a beverage. And so tonight, it's Lithium beer. Now, I'm not going to tell you where it's from because that gives away one of the answers. So we'll talk about that in just a moment. So let's dig into Little Arizona. So we are going to talk about, you know, I guess you could call it a ghost town that was established back in 1870, Ray, Arizona. But the town actually knows, so there is no town there. It actually was moved in the 50s to Kearney. So this town is now just a pit mine, but it has celebrities such as Gory Guerrero, who was a wrestler that was born in Ray, Jean Marie Simpson, who was theater and film activist and artist, was born there, as well as a B classic horror movie, sci-fi movie, camp movie, but Tom Graff basically wrote, produced, and even acted in Teenagers from Outer Space. And so if you haven't seen it, he was born in Ray, moved to Hollywood, and had quite an adventure while he was there. All right. So now is a time you would get to hear from someone else other than just me.
Hi.
Hello, Kristin. How are you?
Fantastic. Thanks so much for having me on.
Oh my gosh. You've had such a weekend.
We had the team at Quantum Leap Productions was honored with 4 Emmy Awards for our film about Liberty Wildlife called The Weight of a Feather. We are over the moon in every way possible.
Indeed. Congratulations.
Thank you so much. There's so many people who contribute to the stories that we tell. Every film I make, I get to research, learn a whole new subject matter, the details of people's lives. It's really an honor. I can't believe that I get to spend my life telling stories. I'm a very lucky person.
I simply agree. I mean, there's always another story. Just when you think, oh, I know this topic, suddenly someone pops up with this earth-shattering bit.
That's right. That's how Arizona keeps its charm, is all the strange little twists and turns, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's why I thought it was funny that the Winnie Ruth Judd, the preliminary hearing, ended today back in 1931. I mean, a story that just goes on and on and on.
Well, and I'm psyched to see Ben Tyler on in the audience, because I can't wait to see that piece. And Ben has told so much great Arizona history over the years with his playwriting, and there's so many people in our community who are fantastic storytellers.
Right. And there's so many amazing stories to tell. So, all right. So let's go ahead and, okay. So now we do trivia here. A little different than, your bar trivia, because we're more interested in the history, the story behind the answer, not just do you know it? Yes or no. So, so we're going to go through our questions. So we'll go through a question, tell the story. Now you keep track of this yourself. So that way no one's going to come in and look over your shoulder and be like, did you change your answer?
No cheating. No cheating. And actually it's a very low bar for getting it wrong. I think you guys are going to hit it out of the park.
So, we're just here to have fun and tell some amazing Arizona stories. All right. So our first question, what was the first Bureau of Reclamation dam built in Arizona? Was it A, Hoover Dam, B, Horseshoe Dam, C, Roosevelt Dam, or D, Bartlett Dam? So which one of those dams do you think was the first dam to dam? All right. And?
It's Roosevelt Dam. So Roosevelt Dam, a lot of people might think it's Hoover Dam. Hoover Dam is the largest dam in Arizona and a major part of our water supply today. But Roosevelt Dam was one of the first of 5 reclamation projects that were cleared by the US government to create a stable water supply in the West. And I love the story of this dam because what was then the Salt River Water Users Association, these were farmers who relied on, they either had too much or too little water to make their crops work. And they banded together and they mortgaged their lands to the federal government to raise the money to build this dam. It took 6 years. The Salt River's mercurial. It's very powerful when it flows and it's very languid when it doesn't. And so if you want to go to the next picture, you'll see the beautiful face of this dam. It was the largest block and tackle dam at the time, which meant that there were a team of stonemasons that primarily came over from Italy because there was a depression in Italy in the 1890s or 1880s, 1890s. They came over, a lot of them settled in Globe, and these men worked on site to hone these 10,000-pound blocks of limestone and build them stair-step style in place. The first few years of construction, it cut off water downstream, and the farmers, they actually had to go in and cut a notch in the dam they were building to deliver water downstream. But I love this photo because you can see there are two little people who've walked out on the face of this beautiful gravity arch dam. And it doesn't sound sexy when you say it, but the fact that this is the structure that created water reliability in central Arizona is incredibly significant. And here you can see the beautiful dam illustration on the cover of Scientific American, the year that it was completed, 1911.
Wow. And what a beautiful dam it is.
That is damn beautiful, isn't it?
Indeed. All right. What did the Roosevelt Dam lay the foundation for in Arizona? Was it A, rural electrification, B, Arizona statehood, C, winter citrus, or the iconic Arizona 5 C's? Copper, cattle, cotton climate, and citrus. Oh my God. All of the above. Everybody got it right. Woo!
All of the above with a caveat that the water that was delivered from Roosevelt Dam doesn't necessarily support copper mines, but everything else that is in the 5 C's really are it's no coincidence that the dam was completed and dedicated by Theodore Roosevelt himself in March of 1911, and a year later the Arizona Territory becomes a state of the Union. So the way that water enables us to have an economy, we're really built on water. We're a desert city that's built on water. Also, the rural electrification, I believe, you tell me, Marshall, in the 1930s, I think that was a big push from the other Roosevelt, from FDR, to get rural towns and outlying areas electrified. Well, they had a drop in a canal at the dam site prior to 1910, so they had electricity on site, and then they started rolling that out to Mesa and down the Apache Trail and Globe. So that area was electrified before a lot of other regions. Arizona statehood, winter citrus, and you'll see this is a beautiful label from the Mesa citrus growers, showing the dam that makes them possible to plan and harvest their crops and base our economy at this point in our statehood on reliable agriculture. And I would argue that cattle, copper, cotton, climate, and citrus are all based on water, and that is the magic of Roosevelt Dam.
I mean, water is at our foundation. I mean, we got here because of those canals that were built to hook them long before we ever got here. And so water has always been key in our story.
And it still is. And here's another example. I love these labels, and I love the way the West is marketed at this time, at the turn of the century. And there's a real Art Deco sense to a lot of this art. But the dam site is at the confluence. It was called the Tonto Dam site, and it wasn't called Roosevelt until it was dedicated. But this label is just so beautiful because you have the citrus, which at that time was a real delicacy. And then you have, whether or not this is actually a Native American that's indicative of the Tonto Apache who worked on the dam at the time, you have some nod to the people in the place that gave rise to this culture.
I mean, even in the flora, I mean, it's like you have that Hollywood favorite, the saguaro cactus, featured probably on the label as well.
Mm-hmm. So this is really the alchemy of water in the desert, and how it enabled us to, have a thriving community here.
And as Lisa says, water is life. Indeed, it is.
I concur.
All right, question 3. Which Zane Grey novel was set in Utah, but was filmed as a motion picture in Prescott back in 1925 and in Sedona in 1931? All right, was it A, The Heritage of the Desert, B, Riders of the Purple Sage, C, The Vanishing American, or D, The Light of the Western Stars. So which one of those do you think it is? It is Riders of the Purple Sage.
Surprise. So all of these books were made into films. And one of the things that's so interesting about Zane Grey is he was one of the first authors to really explore the medium of film. His book, Riders of the Purple Sage, which is arguably his most popular book worldwide, was made into a feature film 5 times in the 20th century. The first time in 1918, I've got to pull up my cheat sheet here, 1918 with Tom Mix, and or actually 1925, sorry, with Tom Mix. And I love that Tony the Wonder Horse gets the second biggest billing. At this point, you know, they're creating the box office stars, and it's really, you know, the men who are the focus of it. But if you have a good horse, your horse can get good billing too. And then in 1931, the Tom Mix piece was shot in Prescott, and then the 1931 version with George O'Brien and Marguerite Churchill was shot in Sedona. And one of the things that Zane Grey did was so interesting was he insisted that his films be shot on location, because the location was always a character in his film. So we can thank Zane Grey for, you know, at that time, most of these Westerns were shot out in the Alabama hills outside of Lone Pine in California, which is beautiful, beautiful country. But to actually bring these productions into the Southwest was pretty darn cool. And that first version, the 1918 version, which is now a lost film, we have some stills of it and lobby cards like this. That was filmed in the Alabama hills. In 1941, they did it again with George Montgomery. That was filmed in Lone Pine. And then in 1996, Ed Harris and Amy Madigan filmed this Utah story in the Vermilion Cliffs of Arizona, which plays prominently into the story. We'll find out more about that coming up.
Indeed. And also, you know, and Tony the Wonder Horse is also on his Hollywood Star of Fame.
Are you serious?
Yeah. So it's like there's Tom Mix, and then you have horseshoes. So that's how important Tony the Wonder Horse was.
You know, you just a good buddy movie never fails, right?
Indeed. All right. Which historic location in Arizona was the inspiration for the Witherstein Ranch in Zane Grey's Riders of the Purple Sage? Was it A, Phantom Ranch, B, Bell Ranch, C, Sierra Bonita, or D, Pipe Springs?
Pipe Spring National Monument. So when we were, the way I'm connected with this story is I have a friend, Craig Baumler, who wrote an opera based on this novel. And Arizona, and the libretto by Stephen Mark Cohen, Arizona Opera premiered this opera with Ed Mell's artwork for the set design. And what we did was we brought the creative team from the opera up to Pipe Spring, to the place that had actually inspired Zane Grey. And his creative process, Grey's creative process, was very interesting because he was, his father wanted him to be a dentist. He wanted to be a baseball player. And he came west in 1907 and hunted mountain lions in the Grand Canyon and decided that he wanted to write stories about the West. And so he would go out and visit places, and he had a cabin outside of Payson, and he would meet the people associated with those places and then turn those people and places into fiction. And this is a lovely national monument up by the Vermilion Cliffs, not far from Kanab, Utah. It is on the Arizona side of the border. It was the first telegraph in Arizona. And it had the distinction of being a place where a lot of polygamists would have a family up in the high country of Utah where they would grow peaches and things like that. And then another family conveniently over the border, just in case the government had an issue with that, But one of the notable things about Pipe Spring was there was a lot of feed for cattle. It was a really rich grassland at that time. It got denuded very quickly. But the spring, actually, they built this fortress over the spring so that if they had, if the indigenous people from the area were no longer happy with them, or the federal government were coming for them, they could lock themselves in this structure and survive. To my knowledge, that never happened, but a lot of families did live here. And this photo, I love it. The guy in the middle is Erastus Dilworth Woolley, and there are lots of little Woolies running around. And then there are some other families in there. And my favorite name, I don't know which kid it is, but his name is Squire Hepworth. I mean, you can't make this stuff up.
Wow. And and that opera was so much fun.
Wasn't it?
Oh my gosh. And and the set by Ed Mell. I mean, I dream of having one of those cacti in my house because they were so beautiful.
Yeah, Ed Mell really knows how to capture the power and the beauty and the mysticism of the Southwest. And he's my favorite painter, and he's one of my favorite humans. So my Ed Mell collection started, I would go to his shows and get the catalogs and just cut his catalogs up and put them up. And then 20 years later, I'm making an opera and a film with him and exploring his creative process. It was just a dream come true.
All right, question 5. What ancient dwellings and unique canyon system was the model for Zane Grey's Surprise Valley and Deception Pass? Was it A,
Was it A, Batatacan Navajo National Monument?
I was like, okay. Or B,
Nankoweap in the Grand Canyon?
Or B, Cliff Palace in Mesa Verde? Or D, White House in Canyon Duché?
It is the Batatacan cliff dwelling system in the Segi Canyons, which is just south of Kayenta on Navajo lands. And this is a picture, this is a great example of Zane Grey. He liked to see himself in the landscape. So a lot of the photos you see of him from this period, this is 1913. This is technically 2 years after he wrote Riders of the Purple Sage. But he had visited this earlier with John Wetherell was his guide, and Harvey Leake, his great-great-grandson, was with us when we went in here, which was just amazing. And this is a really complete cliff dwelling system within a maze of canyons that, if you looked at it from the top, looked like a wagon wheel. And so the idea of these dwellings and these canyons are what gave Zane Grey the impetus to write Surprise Valley, where Burn Venters and Bess hide out and fall in love. And it would be easy to fall in love there. Your next shot is a shot of what it looks like today. We were allowed to go into the dwelling, which was amazing. And this is one of our photographers at Quantum Leap Productions, Robert Flume, and you can see that it's just a magical place.
Indeed. Wow.
And there's great camping. You can camp on the mesa across from this dwelling, and I'm telling people about it, but it's a very peaceful little campsite, the campground that's usually not too, everybody's right up there now, right? But it's a beautiful, peaceful place. And there's a forest of aspen trees down there, which is very rare. It's just, there's so many hidden pockets like this in Arizona. And these are the things that inspired Zane Grey and that inspire me to tell stories.
Wow. All right. So now we're at the halfway point. We're going to take a little bit of an Arizona music break and talk a little bit about Antelope Boy, which was a book written in 1946. Then it was turned into, a few years later, in 1951, a ballet put on by Little Phoenix Theater. with Susan Sussman as the choreographer. And so they wanted traditional music to be played for the ballet. And so Edley Nate was the musician. And so they decided to record his music because everybody was asking to be able to buy it. And so what was Arizona Recording Productions with Ray Boley quickly became Canyon Records. And they are still around today as the oldest independent record label still in production on the planet. They then started an offshoot called Peace for the Gunfighter, where they made a variety of films, Kenyan films. And so they did things like Peace for a Gunfighter, a variety of commercials and other things. And then they decided to do a little contest where they said, hey, send us your movies and we will have a contest for a Young Filmmaker Award. And the winner of that was, back in 1963, Steven Spielberg.
No way, that's so cool.
So I love how we can go basically from a ballet to Steven Spielberg. And so he won a camera, a projector, a way to sync up sound. And so the next year he produced Firelight, which became his first really sound movie that was also premiered at Phoenix Little Theater as well. So that's why I'm glad they tell that story. Now, when you go into Phoenix Little Theater, they have his face plastered all over the place, which is great. But I love
would too.
Oh, completely. I mean, I love how it starts with a children's book.
I love that. I'm going to tell Craig Baumler, the composer, maybe he needs to take a look at Antelope Boy.
I mean, I've yet to actually, ASU has a copy. I have not gone to go look at it yet, but so, or even just the people involved. I mean, it was like, Sussman, she had danced with Balanchine. So she had a school here in Scottsdale. And so I think even just maybe the recreation of this ballet, because it also had folks like Janie Ellis from Cattle Track in it. It was like a who's who. Edley Nate, it was just going on. That's why I love telling that story.
That's a good one.
All right. So on with the show. Question 6. What is Arizona's first destination resort? Was it A, the Arizona Inn, B, the Ingleside Inn, C, the Biltmore, or D, Castle Creek Hot Springs? All right. And the answer is
Castle Creek
Hot Springs. Indeed. Cheers with my lithium here.
With your lithium lager that is made from the beautiful magical spring water that emerges in the spring at Castle Creek Hot Springs, which is now, of course, Castle Hot Springs. It was rebranded in 1905. They dropped the creek. They wanted to make it sound better. And that's when it became Castle Hot Springs. In the 50s, when the who's who of Phoenix would, go out there for the weekend, you had the Goldwaters and the O'Connors, and then it was called Castle Hot. The people who run it now, Mike and Cindy Watts, the insiders call it, just call it Castle. Why beat around the bush? But if you go to the next photo, we have here Mr. Frank Murphy, who is the man with his brother, Nathan Oakes Murphy, who was the territorial governor at the time. They decided that they wanted to acquire Castle Creek Hot Springs and make it into a destination. This is the late 1890s, mid 1890s. Problem was, it was very remote. As the crow flies, it was only, I don't know, I'm going to guess, let's say it was 40 or 50 miles from Prescott, but you had to drive it, or in those days, to get on your horse or get in a buggy, you had to go all the way around or through the Bradshaws, which are a formidable set of mountains. So what Frank and his brother came up with was Frank was also a miner, and he had the Vulture mine in Wickenburg. Is that right? It was the Vulture?
Yeah, indeed.
And so they built themselves a railroad spur. and they took ore from the mine out in one direction, and they brought tourists because the tourism industry was just starting to be established with the rise of the railroads. They brought tourists in the other direction, and then still from the railhead at Hot Springs Junction, it was a 25-mile buckboard ride through some really serious. I mean, this road still goes out, even from Wickenburg, in this like thick clay. It's not easy to get to, but it's worth it. And that's what they were selling. If we talk about Roosevelt Dam and water reliability, building the state, these two, the Murphy brothers really saw the potential for selling the mysticism, the romance of the West. And the Bradshaw Mountains were the true experience. You had major mining strikes. You had cattle. You had people running. You had a wild rodeo in Prescott at this time. And these genteel guests would come out from the East Coast on their private railroad cars, primarily in the teens and 20s, and they would get a taste of what was the actual West. So they had luxury, and they had the West, which two of my favorite flavors put together. And you'll see this is an early postcard on the right of a family in, I don't know if the Victorian dress, probably more Edwardian dress right after the turn of the century. But this is the Palm House, which was the major lodging at the time. And so there are many beautiful resorts and destinations in Arizona. Castle Hot Springs was the first.
And really created, I mean, that whole area on Wickenburg was such a hotbed of dude ranches.
Yes, and yes, you had the I'm blanking the name of it, but this is great. The Champy brothers did Champy Ranch. So Ibby Champy, so one of the coolest things about working on a film, Castle Hot Springs, here you have over a century of history, just like Roosevelt Dam. And we got to go out and talk to people who, Ibby Champy's, she learned to swim in the Castle Hot Springs pool. The relationship between the ranchers and the hotel, they called it the hotel. She said her mother used to say that the hotel will be the ruination of my family, because it tended to be the place where everybody ended up drinking back in the day, in the 30s and the 40s and the 50s and the 60s. And, dances and fights and rodeos. And, you have people who would bring their own horses out and be out on horseback all day and come back and soak in the springs. And then, at 6, it was always cocktail and a dinner. So it's really, East meets West at the highest level possible.
Indeed.
I love this postcard. This is a color postcard from, I'd hazard to say it's the late 40s, maybe the early 50s. But here you really have this lounge ideal. And, of course, lovely ladies by the pool, and they're beautiful photos. Arizona, there are beautiful collections in so many archives. Arizona Historical Society, the State Archive, Charlotte Hall has a beautiful collection. But you would see, in the 50s, you would see these fashion shows by the pool. And, the pool, this is the pool where the water comes down the hill from the springs. And this pool is in front of what was then called the administrative building. Has been renamed a few times, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit. But this was really the center of social life at Castle Hot Springs back in the day.
Well, in this area, so several months ago, we had Lynn on, who was the archivist for Levi Strauss. And
wow.
So the first pair of women's jeans are from the 40s. And they were sold at high-end equestrian shops in major cities. So like New York, for women who were coming for exactly that experience you're talking about. So they had her name written in the back of them so they could actually track down exactly where she had stayed and everything. And so it was all Wickenburg. And so that was the first pair of women's jeans.
Dungarees.
Yes.
Yes. Well, and that, if, you know, when in Rome, if you're coming west, you have to be costumed appropriately. And these folks who came out, they did some real writing. I mean, they had an authentic experience out there. And then to come in and jump in that warm water and be fed and have dances, people would spend months. Bertie Hugh, the wife of, was it Joseph Pugh, who established Sun Oil, like huge industrialists. You know, a lot of these people would come out in winter at Castle Hot Springs, which if you get to spend a day there, it's like being in another world. All of your senses are alive, like time slows down. Can you imagine getting to hang out there in that beautiful sunshine? I mean, this was really set the bar high for the climate of our 5 Cs, of bringing people to Arizona. And then the way that this, you'll see in the film that we made about Castle Hot Springs, Oasis of Time. It's on Amazon, and so is the Writers of the Purple Sage film. You'll see that people like the Rockefellers came to winter, and then they really liked it. And you've got Fulton McCormick comes into Scottsdale, looks at a piece of property, buys it for his wife, and that's McCormick Ranch. So it really drew a lot of people who had the wherewithal to create infrastructure in our state and grow Arizona.
All right, question 7. Castle Hot Springs is in the Bradshaw Mountains, the ancestral homeland of which indigenous tribe? Is it A, the Tonto Apache, B, the Yavapai Apache, C, the Tolkayapi? Am I even close with that one?
The Tolkapaya, it sounded like Tolkapaya to me.
Perfect. I like your ear. Or D, the Maricopa. Oh my gosh.
So this is one of the most fascinating things about the Castle Hot Springs collection is you have a lot of early photographers who are doing beautiful glass plate work. And this is an example of an indigenous man who came to Prescott and obviously was comfortable sharing his regalia with this beautiful owl feather, I think it's owl feather, don't quote me, headdress. And, you know, what's so interesting about this time is, you know, gold was found in the Bradshaw Mountains, and suddenly all the indigenous people are moved to another region, which is, you know, a piece of our history in America that we're finding ways to face and reconcile as we tell new history. And so one of the things that was really important to me with Castle Hot Springs is when you looked at the photos from the 20s and 30s, they would have Native Americans come out and dance and perform for the guests, but they often had large headdresses and they were dressed like what you thought an Indian should look like. You know, they were dressed more like the Plains Indian. And so we got the opportunity in making this film and with the blessing of the Watts family to reconnect with the original Yavapai who the spring was in their territorial homeland. And springs are very, very key to their mythology and their belief system and their culture. So one of the coolest things is we got to bring some people out to sing and drum at the spring, and Mike and Cindy Watts have continued that relationship where the tribe can come out and spend time with the spring in the off season when the resorts close. So there's a lot of opportunity for healing when we acknowledge everyone who's associated with a place.
Wow. All right, question 8. What first does Castle Hot Springs boast? A, the first telephone in Arizona. B, the first golf course in Arizona. C, the first indoor plumbing. Or D, the first hydroelectric ice maker. Oh my gosh. And look at that golf course.
But this is also a trick question because There's a lot of mythology with Castle Hot Springs, and part of the mythology is you have people repeating stories over time, and then someone prints them in a newspaper, and then they become real. What we were able to find is that Castle Hot Springs is known for the first telephone, but if you've got a telephone, who are you going to call? The first telephone was actually, I believe, in Tucson in the maybe late 1880s or early 1890s. But the first telephone number belongs to Castle Hot Springs. And that was Castle Hot Springs 1. You picked up, you called the operator. This was way into the 60s. And you asked for Castle Hot Springs 1 because it was Castle Hot Springs number 1. And it rang at the front desk in the administrative building. Now, you'll notice that this golf course is very special. This is, when I camp with my sister, this is the kind of golfing we do on the right, where they're actually golfing in the wash, which has water running through it. This is Castle Creek, which occasionally makes an appearance and makes life very special. But there was a green and a short 9 at Castle Hot Springs and a golf clock, and that is the first golf course in Arizona. We're known for our golf.
Indeed. Wow.
What I love about these photos, these were taken by a man named Harold Tibbetts, and these are all glass plate, which means that he somehow either on mules packed, he had special bags on mules. These are taken in I think the early 20s, so he might have driven out there, but he went out to Castle Hot Springs more than once, and he had water on site, brought all of his photography equipment, and had to get these glass plates in and out safely. And he was shooting these for Santa Fe Railway. So the railway, I love the advertising from the railroads at this time because the art's amazing, the photography is amazing, and some of the most evocative photos we have of Castle Hot Springs are from Tibbetts coming out to shoot.
I mean, that is just amazing. I mean, yeah, but that's why, I mean, it's trying to find photos is so difficult because, again, those glass plates, and all it took was one slip of the hand and suddenly it was exposed to the sun. So.
Yep. All she wrote.
Wow. All right. Question 9. Which American painter stayed at Castle Hot Springs in the winter of 1902 on assignment for Century Magazine? Was it A, Winslow Homer, B, Andrew Wyeth, C, Maxfield Parrish, or D, George Catlin? So who do you think that painter was? I mean, just look at that beautiful scenery. Oh.
That was a historic photo. This is a current photo of the Castle Formation, for which the creek and the resort get its name. And when you're able to walk back and hike back in this canyon, it's almost lunar. It's called Crater Canyon. I mean, it's really sparks the imagination, especially if you're a flatlander.
Indeed. And then you wind up with things like this.
Right. So Maxfield Parrish came out in 1901, 1902 over that winter. And he was doing a series on the West for Century Magazine. And what I love about, there are things I love about both these paintings. One, if you toggle back to the Castle Formation, you can see that this formation on the right kind of lives in his imagination. This is not realistic, and yet the presence of it and the drama of it are present. The other thing that's very interesting is Maxfield Parrish, there's actually something called Parrish blue, for a blue that he developed specifically to capture the tone of the skies in the American West. And he's known for these. Yes, it's cool, right?
But I didn't realize that the blue was created for our sky.
For our beautiful skies, which used to be a little more blue. But you see he uses these kind of Art Deco Grecian nymphs. But if you look at the landscape, it's still, to me, is an homage to that land in the Bradshaws around Castle Hot Springs. It was such an influential time for him. I mean, may we all be so lucky to go out and be somewhere that influences us so deeply that it expands the form of our art.
And continues to influence others as well. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, wow. That is just beautiful.
It is truly, truly an inspiring place.
Yes, it is. All right. And question 10, when did the original Castle Hot Springs close? Was it A, the 1920s, B, the 1930s, the Depression, C, the 1940s, World War II, or D, 1970s? 1976. Wow.
So it did kind of close in World War II because people, people didn't have the means to travel, resources were being used for the war effort. And so what the owners did at that point was they leased Castle Hot Springs to the government for $1. And hi, Abby. And the government sent, specifically, it was a lot of pilots who flew the Burma hump, came and recovered at Castle Hot Springs for a few years during the war. And then you had some diehard, Vanderbilts and people who had to winter there at the same time. But for the most part, in World War II, it was mostly closed to the public and used as a recovery center for our servicemen, which I'll get to in a moment because we've got Veterans Day tomorrow. But the original era of Castle Hot Springs came to a close in December of 1976 when the Palm House, which was the structure that held most of the guest rooms at Castle Hot Springs, was leveled to the ground by a fire. And the people who were on site fought valiantly with garden hoses to try to put the fire out, but this was an 80-year-old wooden structure. And often, I'm sure you've seen this in your research, in the history of the West, is often punctuated by, and then the Opera House burned down, and then the saloon burned down. And this was really a closing of the frontier for Castle Hot Springs because it still was in its original state being used by guests until it closed to the public in 1976.
Wow. And I've talked to artists in the 80s who would go up and still use the hot springs.
Well, there's an interesting story about that. If you want to go to the next piece, the next slide, this is a view of the Palm House from the administrative building. And when we started this segment about Castle Hot Springs, there's a beautiful picture of the arrival on the other side of this building. This building that were the pictures taken from its deck. It was called the administrative building. It was where you officed and where you checked in. But in the 1970s, after Castle Hot Springs closed, it was gifted to the ASU Foundation by Maysu Talley, who was the owner at the time. And ASU opened it and operated the springs for about 6 or 7 years as a satellite property, an adjunct to ASU. And it was a place where the Arizona Town Hall would go up. And it was kind of a businessman's Camp David. The most significant thing that happened during this period was the 1980 Groundwater Act was finally agreed on because Bruce Babbitt got the miners, the farmers, and the cities all together out at Castle Hot Springs. He sequestered them. He made them soak in the lithium waters and share meals. And after years of fighting, they finally decided on a Groundwater Act that sorely now needs to be updated. But hey, it was a start almost 50 years ago. And then in the period of the 80s that you're talking about, this is where a little bit of my family history intersects with Castle Hot Springs. My mother and her partner, very, very foolhardily, very recklessly, did what a lot of other people looked at and decided not to do, which was to make an undercapitalized run at Castle Hot Springs, which is a huge property with aging infrastructure. And their dream was to open a health spa. They had it for a few years, happy family events. My sister got married there. 35 years later to the day, I walked out where my sister had been married and was working on the film with this story, because after this fallow period from the 70s to 2019, it took the Watts family to come in and really rebuild Castle Hot Springs from the ground up. If you go to the next slide, I'll give you a quick tour. This is also a Robert Markow slide picture. So it's the previous one. His son, Paul Markow, was kind enough to share these. And this is the same era in the 60s. And you'll see the Palm House is this big C-shaped building. That's what burned down. You'll see the administrative building right next to it, which was renamed by ASU the Kennedy Center in honor of JFK, who recuperated here after his PT boat accident in, I think it was 1943. And so the future president spent a few very lonely months at Castle Hot Springs, getting stronger, resting his back. And now if the administrative building, which is now called the Lodge, and the stone house and one of the historic cottages, if you go to the next slide, those are the three original buildings that have been rebuilt. And this is Castle Hot Springs today. And this is the best part of the story, because of after laying dormant for 50 years, you can actually go stay at Castle Hot Springs and eat from the gardens that are fed by the spring water, experience the Bradshaw Mountains, sit in the pools, and just really be close to nature in the most incredibly luxurious way that you could ever imagine.
Right. Glamping.
This is so beyond glamping. Like, this doesn't, I don't even think there's like a catchphrase that's been, you know, the Watts family, Mike and Cindy Watts, we're so lucky that this ended up in their hands, because history is important to them, and they saved as many buildings as possible. There's also a historic laundry, and they really incorporate that original. Castle Hot Springs feels the same. From when I was out there as a kid in the 80s, it feels the same. And I think a lot of that legacy, that close connection with the land, is the magic of this place. And I'm so grateful. I mean, to get to tell the stories, to get to explore the history, to get to sort out a little bit of the history. But most of all, I can feel that water in my bones, and it's a very special place.
Indeed. Cheers to that.
Cheers to that. Little lithium lager and my mocktail. And we raise a glass to Castle Hot Springs.
Indeed we do. And that it's still around.
And it's still around, amazingly. Some things are just as good, if not better, than they used to be.
Right. Oh my gosh. So I always love to ask people how they did. And, you know, and it's not necessarily even how you did, but just look at the amazing stories. Oh my gosh. Thank you so much. And, you know, I love looking in the background, and I see little hints of gold on your bookshelf back there.
What? Was I blocking them? My half dozen girls. I'm so grateful. I mean, what you're seeing here is my first Emmy for the Theodore Roosevelt Dam documentary, one historic Emmy. Castle Hot Springs won Best Historic. Riders of the Purple Sage won Best Arts and Entertainment Program. And then my two new twins for Liberty Wildlife, The Weight of the Feather, just won Best Environmental Program. And I'm just so honored and lucky to get to tell stories about the people and the places that I love. And thank you so much for having me on to talk about them.
Oh, you are welcome. And, and I'm excited for kind of like almost a new era of storytelling with now like the Sidney Poitier Film School opening,
Yes.
and getting to
Yes.
share our landscapes to new storytellers is going to be
Yes.
phenomenal. And doing it in a different way than they did back in the day, but just being able to use those landscapes.
Maintaining our connection to nature, maintaining our connection to each other, and also being really honest about how we got here. I think there are new stories, there are voices who haven't been honored in the past, and how do we welcome everyone into the picture without shaming, without divisiveness. There's a lot of opportunity in what I look at as new history, and Castle Hot Springs was really an opportunity to say, okay, that's the lore, and that's a great story. We can talk about, Colonel Craig charging up Salvation Peak, which you could not charge a horse up. But yeah, let's tell that story because it's a great story. But let's also be clear that, the events that led to the discovery of Castle Hot Springs might have been a little different. We don't have to fool ourselves. We can enjoy these stories around the campfire and the lore and the way these places spark our imagination, but we can also have real conversation with the other people who are connected to these places. Welcome everyone into the picture to have a seat around the campfire. So I think it's an exciting time, and there's a lot of beautiful media coming out of places that have been overlooked. And the fact that we have such a vibrant filmmaking theater community here, we have world-class artists here in Arizona, Ed Mel, Craig Baumler, Randy Murray, Kieran Thompson. People are making amazing things, and there are a lot of people who like to hang out and tell stories. So thanks for listening to some of mine.
Indeed. And thank you so much for coming on and sharing obvious passion. And and I didn't realize you had a family connection to Castle Hot Springs, which is really amazing as well.
A moment, my mother taught me to dream big and chase it, and she chased it, and it didn't work out for her, but to bring her back there 35 years later and see her dream come true, that someone else was able to do that and kind of heal that for her. I don't want to forget, at the end of the day, Castle Hot Springs is about healing, and it's about connecting with people and the land in a way that we don't get to in our everyday lives. And I'm just lucky, I'm lucky to be from Arizona, and I'm the daughter of a historian and a television personality, and that means I have no ends of ways to amuse myself.
But it's in some ways it's like, but without that brief stint of your mom being involved, there is that preservation of it as well.
Yes.
As we look at the Orpheum Theater, there was the Corona family. If they weren't running the Orpheum Theater as a Mexican venue for movies and music, we would not have the Orpheum Theater. So everybody adds a little bit to the story. So.
Well, and when you look at the history of Castle Hot Springs, this is not an easy place to run a business. It's remote now. You can imagine how remote it was 50, 70, 100, 120 years ago.
Right.
And so it's really been kept alive by the passion of people and generations of families who've spent time there. Scott Lyon he was one of the people who helped the Watts family kind of plan a vision for the new Castle Hot Springs. His father is the person who wrote the real estate contract with my mother in the 1980s. I'm lucky to have a family connection, but I'm one of many, many people who've spent quality time out there among their generations and have had this place touch their hearts.
Right. It does indeed take a village.
Everything does.
Indeed.
Especially now. Everything does.
Kristin, thank you so much. Have a great rest of your night.
You too, Marshall. Thanks so much for having me on. And I think I am now inspired to see if I can pull off the sequel to Teenagers from Outer Space. From that, maybe I just need to look at other Arizona filmmakers and pick up the mantle.
And what I loved was that, I mean, for being a super low budget, he actually did special effects that actually were used in, oh gosh, there was an Alien movie where they all had big heads.
Yeah, that one with the aliens with the big heads.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Yeah, I remember that one.
But there are all these special effects that just got carried over, and that it was, I mean, for groundbreaking for its time and what it was able to do.
That is the mother, constraints are the mother of invention. Although I did bristle a little bit when you said low budget, because that hurts my heart a little bit. But everybody does what they can with what they've got.
And some of my favorite movies are those low budget where it's not the Hollywood money coming in. Oh, it's Mars Attacks.
Well, that's a classic. You run out and see that right now, because that's just good filmmaking. That Mars Attacks. If the guy from Ray, Arizona had anything to do with Mars Attacks, hats off to you.
Well, he basically, some of the special effects that he created were then used in Mars Attacks, which just, I mean, shows that creativity. I mean, coming from this little tiny town.
Love it.
Indeed. So you never know where your art's going to pop up.
That's what we like about it.
Indeed. Thank you so much, and have a great rest of your night.
You too.
Oh my gosh, what an amazing night. What great stories. Thank you so much for coming on. And so now you'll see why I always say, if you're watching on Facebook, you want to click on that share button, because we are just having fun with Arizona history all the time. So as we get ready, so this is from the vault, so something you might drive by. And so we talked about it earlier. And so it is now the Sudakiv Museum that really talks about those canals and that creation that really got us here. It was since 1929. It has been acknowledged as an important place. It was a gathering place for so many communities across the valley to come together before any of our families ever got here. It sits now right next to Sky Harbor. You can get to it on light rail. And so it's an important place to go visit. And I loved that they were able to bring in kind of how history is not static, but even how in the 40s, how in the 80s, history and how they were viewing it kept changing and tweaking it a little bit, to the point where now this name was brought to by the communities that were originally here, came up with the Sudavaki Museum. So if you get a chance, go out and visit it. It is over on 44th Street and Washington, right by the airport. So go visit. And now there is also a beautiful mural out there by Thomas Breeze that is brand spanking new. So please go out there and enjoy. And so next week you have Dave Crummy, who is, we're going to have a great time. He's a planner, looking at affordable housing, has his fingers in so many different pies. That's going to be a really fun episode. And so as we get ready to say goodnight, please reach out to me with your questions, your stories. If you have ideas for future shows, let me know. I mean, I love to hear from you all. That's where some of my favorite things wind up coming from. So as we get ready to say goodnight, I love that intro video that Chris and Cole did for me. So thank you so much. And also PJ for keeping me lubricated, because who knew lithium lager from Castle Hot Springs? All right. And as we get ready to say goodnight, I always like to end on a video. And so we are going to end with, Kristin, I didn't say we actually have something in common. I was part of a student Emmy production. And so I'm going to show the video that actually won a student Emmy during COVID. So it's about 3 minutes long. And so enjoy.
Imagine the way Arizona looked in the early 1900s. The streets, the people, with stories beyond the documented black and white.
People kept saying there was no history here.
But Marshall Shores sees history in color.
I'm known as Arizona's hip historian.
Also known as a local celebrity.
So I want to welcome you to Arizona History Happy Hour.
One of Marshall's friends, Erica Kempler, watched his audience skyrocket and said it's for a good reason.
He doesn't simply study history, he's actually trying to make a significant mark in it.
And Marshall made his footprint in history at Greenwood Cemetery in Phoenix, a lawn that celebrates the people who defined Arizona.
You can tell a lot about a city by going and visiting its cemetery and seeing its history.
To Marshall, each stone in Greenwood Cemetery represents a life with a story to share. But in the case of Nikolai DeRaylen, it was the absence of a headstone that made it so significant.
It's a really amazing story.
Nikolai DeRaylen visited Arizona to treat his tuberculosis.
It didn't go so well for him. He wound up passing away a few months later.
He left behind mounds of wealth and his beloved wife, Anna.
As they're ready for burial, they discovered that Nikolai was a woman. And so when they buried him here in Greenwood in 1906, they actually buried him in a dress and without a headstone.
Erica, who is also the founder of Arizona Trans Alliance, says his story is remarkable.
It really does say here's a person who managed to live a life with a tremendous secret that would have undoubtedly destroyed his life.
Nikolai had enough money to afford a traditional burial, but Marshall explained that his unmarked grave was a sign of disrespect.
Without a headstone, he was erased from time.
Then came an idea.
When I found out that we had a gender pioneer right here in Arizona from 1906, I started working with the local community to raise funds to get him a headstone.
It was really through his invitation I became a part of it.
They capitalized efforts through social media and word of mouth.
Going to bars and people giving money here, giving money there.
In 2 years, they raised over $3,000, but the question remained, what should it say?
It was my opinion that what we put on the headstone shouldn't be outing, should not out him as trans.
My friend Erica came up with this quote and I was like, oh my God, that is perfect.
A quote that speaks truth to Nikolai and the entire transgender community.
To be yourself in a world that is constantly trying to make you something else is the greatest accomplishment.
Now the headstone stands among the masses, securing Nikolai's spot in Arizona's LGBTQ history.
So that's one of the things I try to give those marginalized communities a voice.
A contribution that also writes Marshall into Arizona's story. In Phoenix, Caitlin Keenahan, Cronkite News.